Hi, everyone. Welcome to Thursday Nighter, round two for the month of April. I am Michael Perry, and I am pleased to be joined by state champion Samrug Narayanan. He is the three-time state champion, and if I'm not mistaken, he's won 3 years in a row. He's also an international master, and yeah, it's great to be joined by him, and just looking forward to covering all these great games from the Thursday Nighter action.
Yeah, and thanks for having me. I look forward to commentating on these really interesting games.
Yep, I think we have our player of the week today. That's Dane Zagar, pretty prominent player at the club. I think we have some notes on him.
Yeah, so Dane here is the Chess Castle Club president, and he's the main operator. His peak rating is 2183, which is just below the national master mark, and I'm sure that he'll hit it soon. He's won two back-to-back national tournaments for the under 2100 sections for over $10,000 in prizes, and that's just in 2024. Because he won so much, they actually gave him like a 2100 rating floor so that he can't keep winning all the national tournaments for U2100. He's been a national arbiter and qualified to tournament direct for all events, including many different sizes. And he's a successful coach who's brought many students from beginner to 2000, including one of our co-hosts, Michael Perry, and last month's tournament winner, John Blomer. He's open to new students, and you can email him at danezager@gmail.com. Some of his best wins include Kevin Wasiluk, Andrew Titus, Frankie Johnson, Kazim Gulamali, Graham Horowitz, me, and he's drawn against great players like Sean Nagel, Jackson Wall, and Joseph Wan.
Yeah, definitely. Dane's a very strong player. I feel like he has a good balance between tactical prowess and strategical prowess. And any strong player like 2100 level like Dane is needs to have that good balance. But very, very entertaining player to watch and also play if you get the chance.
Yeah, so we can go through his game, which is shown up here. Just to kind of recap what went on in the game. So it started with Queen's Gambit declined with Knight c3, Bishop g5. It kind of went through a normal Sevislav structure where Norman, his main plan is to play b6 and eventually push for c5, kind of a breakthrough to try to equalize position. And Dane, who's white here, wants to get as much activity as possible early to compensate, because you can see here, Black doesn't have too much activity at the moment with his pieces. So the whole game plan is for Black to try to strike quickly while White tries to take up his opening and kind of a mini advantage and extra tempo in the opening to get more activity. Do you have any thoughts on this opening, Michael?
Yeah, it looks pretty standard. It looks like a Kardakawa type structure. I know Dane likes to. He's quite good in that structure. He's taught me this opening. So very playable for Black. Looks like he decided to play c6 instead of c5. Maybe c5 might not be good at this point in time. But so maybe a bit more of a passive approach, but looks like if you do c5 now, I don't know if he has like knight b5 and bishop g3 stuff coming in. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's why he played. So Norman played queen b8 in this position, and then on his very next move, he played c5, just breaking through the position.
There we go. Yeah.
And this is kind of a critical moment because there's so many different captures. You can play b takes c5, you can play d takes c5, or you can even play c takes d5. And there's kind of a lot going on with all these pawns kind of stuck against each other in the center of the board. And Dane played c takes d5 here, which is kind of an interesting approach. And after a few tactics, Black was able to get this position. There's two threats here. One is this knight c3. The knight on c3 is hanging, and also the pawn on h2. So this is kind of a tactical resource that Norman had to eventually kind of, you can call it a fork of some sort, where two pieces are still attacked, even though they're caused by different lines. So Dane was forced to actually give up one of his pawns here with bishop takes h2, and now he can safely retreat, and black's just kind of up a pawn here.
Yeah, I wonder if he missed that, or if there was a way that could have been avoided.
I mean, going back to the earlier position here, maybe it might have been better to, for example, take like here. Just a possibility, since after something like this, maybe the b file is open up for the queen.
Yeah, it's probably just the wrong center capture there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It looks like at this point, Dane still had a lot of time on his clock, so maybe he just rushed that move a little bit.
Yeah, maybe. It's kind of difficult to see. There's this forced line where it leads to these tactics where black will eventually win a pawn, but at first it's not the clearest thing to see, especially going all the way from this position. It's another 3 or 4 moves or so.
Yeah.
So after this, he was kind of stuck to be down a pawn, and now the knight on c3 is being targeted again, which is actually a really nice move by Norman, because after queen d2, he was able to take. And now the queen is entering on h2, attacking the bishop, threatening something like queen h1, which will eventually he'll take on g2. So this is kind of a really good sequence for black, transforming his position from just up a pawn, which is already good, to now getting an invasive attack on white.
Yeah, it looks like that bishop on b7 might open up. That g2 pawn looks quite vulnerable, so I don't know if he could eventually have some kind of attack along the light scores there.
Yeah. I'm not exactly sure how this could be easily defended from this kind of position. I mean, his knight is kind of just being attacked, and he has to do something to defend it, and it's really difficult to defend that while also stopping his queen h2.
I wonder if this might just be bad, but I wonder if you can just play knight d5 and somehow make the case that the rook and the knight for the queen is somehow better than the position we ended up getting in the game. I don't know. Obviously, yeah, throwing in knight e7.
Knight h7. Yeah, this is actually kind of interesting because, I mean, you have the rook and knight against the queen. I'd imagine this is still probably not that great for white, considering this knight is stuck and it doesn't really have many places to move. It could go to c6. But I mean, I guess it's an interesting try just to spice things up a bit rather than just to allow queen h2 and kind of get the pawns taken.
Yeah, either way, he's in a lot of trouble.
For sure. It could have been possible, maybe try king h1 instead, so that, the queen can't ever infiltrate. But, I mean, I understand this kind of looks scary, especially with this really strong bishop. And then once this bishop moves back somewhere, like bishop e5 again, I mean, white's kind of in a lot of trouble with the king side, especially.
Yeah.
Just kind of continuing from this spot. So, he could have taken on g2 immediately, maybe, but throwing in the check at first doesn't ever hurt, especially now you're threatening something like bishop f3, just winning material. So at this point, it's kind of difficult for Dane. He's down a few pawns, and the king is also extremely weak on e2.
Yeah. A very tough position to overcome. I don't really see any way to. So if you just play queen takes g2, do you have to? I don't know if you can try like e4 or something just to shut down that bishop. Temporarily save yourself.
Yeah, e4 could be. I mean, I guess it's a try. Just eliminate the bishop. Say what's the difference between being down 2 pawns and 3 pawns? But I guess this is already kind of difficult. So, I mean, he ended up playing rook f1 just to escape the pin with a skewer with rook bishop f3, and I guess Norman just plays simple chess, very natural, just trading off rooks, going into an endgame where he's up just a few pawns already. And he trades queens, which I think for white, you'd probably want to try to keep the queens on the board with something like queen b1. But at this point, I guess it's difficult because you're probably going to lose another pawn. But after a queen takes and a knight takes, white is kind of just down 2 pawns, and there's not that much counterplay he has, even with the 2 bishops, because black just has more activity plus more pawns, which makes it really difficult to get anything. And then after a few moves, they traded off some pieces. Now we got to this position where white is starting to get a little more counterplay. He's winning some pawns and he's getting something against the king. But after something like this, black has kind of escaped the trouble. One thing to note is if Dane tries something like, let's say, bishop f6, he's actually threatening rook g7, which leads to a perpetual check. So I think in this position, it's really important that Norman has to play h5 so that he allows that extra king space.
Yeah.
But I guess that's something kind of dangerous if he doesn't see h5.
Yeah, there's always tricks. I remember
Mhm.
hearing other commentators say that in chess, like especially with the top level players, you always need to beat a player like 3 times in the game. Like you need to beat him in the opening, you need to beat him in the middle game, you need to beat him in the end game. Obviously, sometimes a guy can just hang mate or hang a piece in the end game, and that's not the best example. But it can be tough to overcome a good player. You have to kind of play a complete good game and always be looking out for tricks, which is in part what makes chess so hard.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, even in a position where it looks black is up 3 pawns here, but there's always tricks, and you can never just take a sigh of relief and say, "Oh, I've already won this game." You just got to finish the job.
Exactly.
So that's what the game is at right now, live. You see, he tried the same thing with bishop d4. It's kind of the same idea. Now I still think h5 is a very important move. But at least now there's some counterplay where after something like h5, there's rook g7, and then you win the pawn. And I guess he's still down 2 pawns, but this pawn kind of defends against these 2. So, I mean, I guess there's still some hope left for Dane in this position. He can try to overcome kind of the deficit.
Looks like maybe black will start trying to push that h pawn, but definitely looks a bit more promising for Dane than it did like 10-15 moves ago.
Yeah, for sure. So going from this game to board 1, Connor and Miles, these players have kind of won this tournament section many times, so this was really an important game, considering especially they're on board 1. So just going from the start, it looks like a kind of interesting opening from Miles with b3 and this whole setup, and Connor is just playing naturally, just developing his pieces, getting his knights out. And eventually we reach kind of think about it similar to the game with Dane and Norman, where there's these 4 pawns kind of in the center. And I mean, this is a really common setup where the white has pawns on d4 and c4, black has pawns c5, d5. And it's really always interesting how these games turn out, especially because there's just so many different options. And when there's a lot of options, different players can make mistakes. It's easier to make a mistake when there's more options than if everything is forced. Usually players, especially at this level, will be able to find their way out. So after some exchanges, we reached this position. He played queen c1, probably just to avoid any knight c4 ideas if he plays knight b4. Queen c2, knight b4. So I guess he kind of just wanted to escape that with queen c1.
And do you think initially queen c1 seemed very weird to me, but looking at it further, I thought maybe he played queen c1 so he could like bring the bishop back to e2, because he's worried
Mhm.
about B4. Sorry, B5 tricks. But if B5, does he have like, let's say B5 in this position? Can he just take that pawn because of the discovery?
Yeah, if b5 here, I think just taking on this is definitely fine. If takes here, then you win the bishop, and this is just you're up a pawn. And if there's any tricks like this, bishop takes e3, it's important that you have queen takes c6, and you're just up a piece now for white. So there's no silly tactics where if you try to take this, now black isn't really down a pawn anymore.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
guess
So maybe,
also he was. Oh, sorry.
yeah, maybe that's why he played Queen C1 then. Maybe he was a little worried about that bishop. Even if tactics
Hmm.
work out for him, maybe because Queen E2 is so natural in these type of positions, but maybe he just wanted to make sure that bishop had a retreating square.
Yeah, because I think if he plays queen e2 here, I think he might have been worried about b5 and after bishop d3, like before. And now the bishop really doesn't have anywhere to go. So I think you kind of have to play rook d1. But I mean, white wouldn't really try to go for a position like this because after like queen e7, black has the bishop pair, and especially with where this is an open position, the bishop pair can matter a lot.
Mhm.
But I still thought queen c1 was a little interesting. There were other options that he might have thought of, like knight d2 or knight c3, for example, just to because the queen has a lot of squares that it might be good at. So choosing one immediately kind of makes it so that you have to choose that. But if you develop some of your other pieces first, then your queen can decide where to go based on how black responds. So he played queen e7, just defending against any threats. For example, in this case, bishop takes e6 was threatened. Okay. And this is kind of an interesting position because uh, it's kind of symmetrical, this whole structure. Pawns on e6, e3, and then basically all the pieces are still remaining on the board. The only difference is that now white has this queen on c1 versus black has this uh, queen on e7. So I think in this position, I would probably prefer black here just because the queen is better placed, especially when the rooks are going to come to c8, d8, and white tries to do the same thing, but it's kind of difficult with this queen in the way. So
Yeah.
if there's something like this, I think, yeah, I would definitely prefer black.
Yeah, agreed. I think maybe like a 94 here, just to kind of open yourself up a little bit, kind of force. It's a forcing move, kind of the first move you look at. Looks like it forces black to do something because he doesn't want to probably let white take on f6 and double the pawns. So maybe you can go for like a 94 here, perhaps.
Yeah, I think 94 is a solid move here. Kind of you're threatening you're threatening to take on f6, and black has to find a way to respond to this. Uh, Probably knight d5 is preferable here. And it's the thing that black has that white doesn't in this position is that in some cases he can even try to push for f5 and e5, where it's kind of difficult with knight on f3. Uh, White is unable to go for a same push. But I think 94 is just a solid option, trying to trade off pieces when he's a little worse. I mean, in the game, he went for something similar. Instead of bringing the f3, instead of bringing the d2 knight, he brought the f3 knight, which I'm not too sure about because I think this knight on f3 was a little better than the knight on d2. So maybe just going 94 immediately was probably a better option. So after knight d5, he played a4. Um, Miles playing a4, his plan is to try to attack this b5 pawn, kind of upset the structure because black has a little more space on the queen side. But the problem with a4 is now it allows the knight to jump to b4. And after something like this, just if you look at white's position, it's really passive. The rook is stuck on a1, this bishop is on b1, queen on c1, and this knight doesn't really have anywhere to go.
Hmm. Yeah,
So I
very
think
cramped
maybe,
position.
so I think maybe a4 wasn't the right choice, just because it opened up this b4 square, which is really good for all the knights to go to, especially when you have a bishop here.
Yeah, what do you think maybe would have been a good alternative to a4?
It's kind of hard to say. I think one option might even be playing knight c3, returning back to the original square, just trying to trade off pieces in any way. And you can try something like if he goes back, then you play knight e4 again. I think trading off pieces here was at least attempting to is a really good option for white, just to make sure, because these pieces for black just look really strong.
Yeah.
This bishop could open up at any point, even though I think black here is threatening to play f5.
Yeah.
And even a lot of types of positions where there's pawn on e3, at the moment it doesn't work, but you have to always watch out for potential sacrifices here. So going deeper into the game, so the queen was forced to return to d1, and it was kind of black just has all these extra tempi. And the queen is kind of just being kicked around at this point with all these really strong rooks, while whites are kind of just stuck on the original square or like the castling square.
Yeah.
So in this position, already the knight is being kicked out. Black just has so much more space.
Yeah, it's a little interesting though now because f4 seems somewhat natural. Just kind of you have your pawn, knight, and bishop, then all pointing at the e3 pawn. But then you kind of seems like you would give white a little counterplay because then you're opening up the diagonal for his b1 bishop. So f4 will definitely be a move that Connor will have to kind of consider deeply.
Yeah. I mean, when you see a move like this, you always have to consider it. Even if it ends up being bad, you have to see this kind of move.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's kind of interesting. I mean, it allows eventually maybe queen g6, queen h7, you have some counterplay. But I think what Connor played in the game, just knight takes e3, is just a really strong move, just winning the material.
Yeah.
Problem now if takes, then something like bishop takes e3 check, king h1, or takes d2. Now you're attacking this bishop, attacking g2. I think at this point you just kind of have to lose another piece, and it's really difficult for white. So he played knight f3, just trying to complicate things a little bit. He even sacrifices the knight just to kind of get some counterplay. So at this point, if he just takes back on f1 like this, I mean, there's not that much for white to do here. It's kind of just sitting, being down material, plus being passive. It's just really difficult. So I mean, knight takes e5, knight takes f5 might not be the best move, but I mean, at this point, he might as well just try something.
Yeah.
Get some tricks. Knight c2 was kind of an interesting move. I mean, he's sacking material, but at this point, black is just up a clean piece, and this king is really weak. There's no threats for the black king. So in this position, Miles just resigned.
Yeah, good game from Connor. I feel like he did a good job taking advantage of just maybe a slightly passive approach from Miles, and slightly just I feel like because of that Queen C1 move was I don't know exactly what the computer would say, but seemed I feel like you could label that as an inaccuracy. Seemed just a little bit of an odd placement for that queen, and just made it harder to connect the rooks and get your rooks to the nice open C and D files. So maybe that was a little bit of starting to go wrong, perhaps.
Yeah, I think this is a really good game from Connor. We just took a position where he's only slightly better, just a little more active pieces. And Miles didn't really make any giant glaring mistakes. Connor was just kind of being able to take advantage of those really small inaccuracies. Maybe something like a4 could be criticized, but I mean, when you're in a difficult position, it's really hard to come up and generate a lot of good ideas, especially when you're cramped and defending. So a4 trying to get some activity kind of makes sense to me. But yeah, that's just a really good game on Connor's part.
Yeah.
So next game we have was between Eddie and Nathan Hoover. And I mean, these players play Thursday Nighters in a lot of Castle tournaments. So,
Yeah, very frequent players, strong players too.
definitely. So it started out as a Sicilian, Najdorf Sicilian, where Eddie goes for Bishop d5. And in the Najdorf, kind of every move from white has been tried. To some degree, Bishop g5 is one of the most common moves, along with Bishop e3. So this is kind of a really standard theoretical approach. This is kind of all theory. Do you have experience with this a lot, Michael?
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you a question because as I don't play the Sicilian myself, but I've started playing e4 again after just a long time playing d4. And in these positions, I always play a4 because I worry about black getting in b5 and shadowing that bishop. So on, I think it was move 3, it would have been, or move few moves back here. I always just play a4. Well, yeah,
Oh,
the move where you said that a white has like a bunch of options. I've kind of settled on it. Yeah, right here. I've always settled on playing a4, but like you said, there's so many options. I was wondering, what do you play? Well, usually play in this position, or do you kind of mix it up?
I guess from my side, I don't usually go into the open Sicilian. I have a lot of different options with like the anti-Sicilians. So I mean, also, I kind of just try to play a lot of different openings. So I don't really have a main opening that I usually play in this position. But I kind of know general strategies.
Yeah,
And I know a lot of time a4 is kind of, it makes sense. You want to stop b5. And when you get into the openings where white is pushing on the king side, black is pushing with b5 on the queen side, this just becomes really chaotic and there's so much going on with all of potential sacrifices or just pawn breaks.
yeah, absolutely insane position, but I guess that's what you get when you play a Sicilian.
Yeah, for sure. So it continued just natural development from both sides. And in this position, Nate, he played b4, which is kind of an interesting move. He's trying to kick away the c3 knight, which is really common in these types of structures. And now Eddie played knight d5, which is, I think, the best move in the position. So it's kind of an interesting sacrifice, and it's hard for black not to take it. Something like queen d8. You're kind of giving up a lot of squares and control to white.
So we're out of theory at this point, right?
According to the Lichess Masters database, there's actually been 5 games in this position,
Oh, wow.
but I guess it's relatively rare that now that most players recognize that b4 is not the most accurate move. But I mean, Eddie started this move at an hour, 15 minutes, and 44 seconds, and he gained time making it. So either he's used to these types of ideas or he actually has studied these positions before.
Yeah, that's definitely some impressive stuff from Eddie because I wouldn't consider that move. Or if I considered it, I would probably be too scared to play it. Looks very aggressive, but I guess that's like I said, if you're going to play a Sicilian, you got to be looking for these moves.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, playing it while gaining time is also like if I were to play this type of move, I would make sure to think for a decent amount to make sure. But I think Eddie probably knows these positions very well. And 95, if you play a Sicilian a lot, you kind of know the general strategy.
Yeah.
So Nate took it and went into this position. And now I think Eddie correctly played knight c6 check. And the idea is just you have a lot of play. And in this move, for example, I think bishop takes c6 is best. And pawn takes something like knight d5. I mean, you have a lot of different options here. One is taking. And now you get into a position like this where I mean, white is down a piece, but he has a pawn for it, and the black king is really vulnerable. Plus, the pawn structure is just terrible.
Hmm. Looks like maybe at some point he could invade along the e file too. I want to play like
Mhm.
a queen e2 or a queen e3 right away, but then he probably meets that with queen e7. But infiltrating on the e file at some point seems like a good try.
Yeah, for sure. So I think this is a really kind of interesting way to play. And I mean, my evaluation of the position is at this point, I think white is already much better, but I guess it's really
Yeah.
unclear, especially when you're down a piece and the activity isn't so easy to play for.
Yeah.
So Nate played king c8 here, but after bishop takes f6, I think he kind of ran into a little bit of trouble because, I mean, there's not many ways to recapture that bishop. One, if you take with the knight, then you run into bishop f5 check. And now black is just running out of moves. For example, if you play here, you have rook e8. And already white has just won the game, basically.
Wow. Yeah. Pretty, pretty much over from there.
Yeah. And then I guess the same thing, if you ignore it, then rook e8 is always a threat. And there's not really any good way to stop it.
Hmm.
So he tried taking on c6 just to get rid of that bishop, get rid of that knight, allow the king to move to b7. And then he played rook e8, followed by king b7, and now he took on c6.
Hmm.
And I think from this point, it's kind of just over, basically. White is just completely winning.
Yeah.
If anything, he played queen to take c6 and then got his queen pinned to the king. But I mean, any other way, if he played this, for example, you could probably just take. And now this is check, and you're about to queen.
Yeah.
So I don't think there was much that Nate could do in this position anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, then now he's just up a queen, and then Eddie just played solidly, and it's pretty. He won the game in a pretty nice fashion, leading to a checkmate.
Wow. Yeah. Very convincing game from Eddie. That's very interesting. That knight d5. That'll have to be something I look into. Very not obviously not an obvious move, but he was able to make it work, and he made it work quickly. He just he won a few moves later. So um, very great, well played game from Eddie.
Yeah, I think that's really impressive. Just first of all, knowing that you have to play 95 and playing it very quickly, and then he basically played a great game after that. I mean, he played all the right moves. He needed to play knight c6, and then here bishop takes f6 is really critical. I mean, I'm sure a lot of moves are winning, but this is just the cleanest. And yeah, I mean, from there on, black just really didn't have a chance.
Yeah, I wonder if after b4, just out of
Mhm.
curiosity, I'm not sure about this, but I wonder if the reason he plays knight d5 is because if you make any other move, can black just play d5 himself? Like if you play like a knight c e2, I wonder if
Mhm.
black can just go d5.
Yeah, I think d5 is always in the cards. I'm not exactly sure at the moment. I mean, after something like e5, you probably have knight e4, and this is just kind of interesting game now. But I think generally, even if you don't play d5 at the moment, it's just really strong because you have the option to play d5 at some point. And now this knight on e2, knight on d4, it's kind of stuck, and white doesn't have too much activity.
Hmm.
So I mean, I think d5 is probably a solid move here, but even something simple like bishop e7, castle at some point, or castle queenside.
Yeah, white doesn't probably have enough counterplay in time. Black already has the open c file. They already have a
Mhm.
pawn on b4, so knight d4. You got to play something forcing like knight d5. So I guess
Yeah,
good opening prep from Eddie.
yeah, for sure. Well, then I mean, instead of taking on d5, black could play other moves like queen d8, for example. But I mean, you can just see how strong that d5 is. Like, if you don't take it, then you just have a really strong position. And even after something like this, it's really hard to actually even take this. Like if I just play a random move h3, if you take now, the king is just stuck. So the knight on d5 is actually just, you can't actually ever take it. So I think that's some really strong stuff from Eddie. Checking back on Dane's game. It's kind of, we can go back from where we left off. So Norman did find h5. Really important move, as I said before, kind of stopping the idea of rook d7 with a perpetual check. And from there, it was kind of really interesting. There's not many pawns left now. So actually, it becomes a lot closer to draw territory than it was before. Now that, although black is only up, black is up one pawn, it is a really strong passer on the h file. If there ever becomes a situation where black can sack his bishop and pawn for black's, white can sack his bishop and pawn for black's 2 pawns, it'll actually lead to a draw because a rook versus rook and knight leads to a draw. So when you trade a bunch of pawns, it actually becomes closer to a draw, which is actually in Dane's favor.
Yeah.
So we come to this position where the pawn on h2 has now actually been stopped. And this kind of leads to a scenario. There's no actually way to defend this h2 pawn, which is really interesting. I think you have to kind of defend it in other ways. One way that actually doesn't really work is if you play e5. Now there comes the tactic again where you sack the bishop. And here after rook takes h2, it's actually a draw.
That's very nice. And I feel like if Norm was under time pressure there, which it looks like he has 18 minutes in the current position, so he wouldn't be considered under time pressure. But if he was low on time, that's a move that looks very appealing. So he might have blundered that, but it's a very natural move. But like you said, it's a good point where if you can just get it down to a rook and knight versus rook, you're going to have a draw. So got to be careful not to allow those 2 pawns to be taken.
Yeah, for sure. And the only other way that I can see at the moment to defend this h2 pawn is by playing knight f4, kind of blocking out this bishop. But now it's actually interesting. White might have some ideas to win, or if he plays b6. It's kind of hard to stop that, right?
Yeah.
You never actually have rook b2. And if something like rook e1 to try to play this, now you got this hanging. So I think after something like knight f4, b6, it might be in the cards for white Dane to actually win this game, which is kind of a crazy feat coming from a position back here where he's just simply down a bunch of material.
Yeah, that'd be crazy.
So I think at this position, Dane is really close to just achieving that draw.
Wow. Impressive
It's kind
stuff.
of impressive.
Maybe
for sure.
Maybe what we can take away from this, at least so far, is maybe Norm made a mistake by trading off too many pieces. Maybe he had to keep a bit more material on the board, kind of like you were saying, since after all that material gets traded off, even though he's still up on material, now there's always the possibility, like you mentioned, of sacking the bishop for the 2 pawns. And we saw it already applied in that one position where e5 was just no good for him.
Yeah, for sure. I think kind of getting into a position where now he loses all his pawns was definitely not ideal. And I wonder if taking on e3 is really necessary, because he's never really trying to push this e-pawn. His main goal is just to push this h-pawn. So it might have just been better to just push h4 immediately, try to get that out.
Yeah, that looks really good.
So maybe he was just trying to take too much material. And especially in this type of position, he played knight d5, which brings his knight kind of away from what he's trying to achieve. Maybe just another move like h4 could have been a tiny bit better. So actually going back to the current position, we have this shown out
Wow.
where he did play knight f4, and now there's b6, and I think Dane might actually be really close to winning this now.
Yeah, this would be quite the feat. I know in some tournaments they have like an upset trophy, and this wouldn't be
Mhm.
an upset trophy because I think these. I guess I don't know what Norman's rated, but he's obviously in the premier top section, so he's a good player. But this would qualify for like a, I don't know, underdog in the sense that you were completely losing, and now Dane might even be able to win it himself. So quite a turnaround.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, looking at a position like even maybe going back here, this just looks super difficult. Like, how could you imagine White ever winning from this position?
Hmm.
He's just down 2 pawns, has very little activity. But now you go to a position like this. Mhm. Okay. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of difficult to stop this b6 pawn.
Hmm. Yeah.
I mean, do you see any way that you can think to stop it? Because uh, I think you might have to just settle for something like rook e1, just settle for that draw.
Yeah, exactly. You might need to like force a repetition because if White tries to go back like King A2, you go back yourself to Rook E2 check, and you just kind of have a little
Yeah,
dance.
yeah,
And
something like this.
if you move up with your king, obviously the same story happens. Then Black gets behind the pawn. So looks like draw probably is the most likely outcome in this game.
Mhm. Well, I guess in this case, there's something like king a2. You always have just queening.
Or queen. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, this is still not not winning for sure. And it looks like he did play rook e1 with the idea just trying to stop that pawn at all costs. But it's actually interesting. After here, uh, White might still be winning because after something like rook b1, now you can defend. And you can see this bishop. Bishops are always extremely strong in endgames because they just have such a wide range of moves. She said something like this. Black can actually stop that pawn.
Wow. Yeah.
So
Crazy stuff.
it's just kind of interesting to see all just how it all works out. So it might actually be difficult for Black to save this game now.
Wow.
I mean, yeah, at the moment, I don't really even see a way that Black can stop the promotion of the white pawn.
And Dane also has a huge time advantage, so Norman can't really play on the clock or anything of that sort. So Dane has all of a sudden become the favorite.
Yeah, it's just crazy turnaround by him. That's really an impressive feat, going from a position where he's just completely lost to now he has a good chance to win. So just you can pause this game at this position and start looking at some of the others. So going from this game, Ethan Hunt versus Daniel Steinecke. Daniel is an improving player. He just kind of graduated from the open section. He improved on to the premier section. So that's good work by him. And he's playing Ethan Hunt, who is also a very strong player. And this, we saw another QGD. Seems like a common opening in these positions. And they got another kind of style with Bishop G5. This is kind of just a really mainline QGD. Good opening prep from both sides. Yeah, this kind of opening has been played many times, and it's a well-known theoretical idea. White is going for this idea of f3 followed by e4 with a push, and the white bishop can always go back to f2.
I don't know about you, but I always slightly prefer White in these positions. Obviously, it's all theory, so black is completely all right, but white's play is always much cleaner, it seems to me. I don't know what you prefer in these positions, but
Yeah, I think it's definitely a little easier for white to play. He kind of has a clear plan with f3 and e4. But yeah, black's definitely still solid, and I mean, black is definitely not any worse in this position. So kind of kept going. Now black played c5 here, which is a really common break. And just the idea is if black just keeps not really doing anything, just pushing pieces, moving them around, eventually white will play e4. And if white has control of the center, then he just has a much easier game. So this is kind of a great time for the break with c5. And now in this position, you can see now there's a little issue with playing f3, right? This e3 pawn is really weak. And now I think white might even wish that he never played f3 in the first place. But knight d4 is just a good blockading move, stopping anything with the e3 pawn being captured. This is kind of just standard play at this point, just moving all the pieces to the best possible location.
yeah, it seems like a very level game. It looks like white has a weakness on e3, but black also has a weakness on d5. So very level game so far, but definitely dynamic, interesting position that can go, I mean, any way. Definitely a three result game.
Yeah, I mean, nothing too crazy has happened so far. It's just kind of just good positional play from both sides at the moment. So Ethan decided to get the bishop pair, which is kind of an interesting position. And now black actually has two options to recapture. One is with just a simple queen takes e6, which he played. But it could be interesting to think about playing f takes e6. Kind of now this d5 pawn is defended. And I mean, which recapture do you prefer?
I definitely prefer the pawn, partially because I'm more center oriented. Maybe I emphasize the center too much in my games, but I definitely prefer the pawn. What about you?
Yeah, I think I also prefer the pawn recapture here just because it kind of gets more control of the center. Now you have these two pawns. Eventually, you could try to push. Obviously, not at the moment. But you kind of want something in return for losing the bishop pair, right? Because now if you just take with the queen, I mean, none of the structure really changed, but now white has the bishop pair, which is obviously preferred. So I think maybe taking the pawn with the pawn was an interesting choice. But it's definitely hard to say, and the differences would matter much later in the game.
Yeah.
So he continued with queen b3, knight c4, which is a good move from black, just targeting this e3 pawn. But now actually came kind of a blow from white, where it's tactical. So if black just recaptures the knight with like knight takes d5, then he runs into bishop takes c4, and now this knight is just simply lost. And actually, that ended up happening. And black took on e3, which is, I mean, at this point in this kind of position, he has to do that. But now he runs into this issue. And now he's just kind of down a piece.
It's no good way to put it.
Yeah. I guess it is a little dangerous. You come to a position like this. But now it's kind of important. You think that this g2 pawn you don't really have a great way to defend it, but now comes f4, which kind of just saves the day. I mean, it allows the bishop to drop back, protect that g2 pawn, and after something like he played king h8, defending against bishop takes f7. But now, I mean, white is consolidated for sure, and he's just up a clean piece. So it's
Brief,
kind of interesting. Oh, sorry.
a brief scare there, but yeah, F4 saves the day just in the nick of time.
Yeah, for sure. That's kind of interesting going back to this position where after knight c4, you have knight takes d5. And uh, I think black in this position only has one move that kind of saves it for him, and I think he has to play knight takes e3. Now there's no kind of silly threats. He's winning back the pawn. So if something like this, now it's just equal material.
Mm. Yeah, he must have missed that. Otherwise, he surely would have gone for that.
Yeah. So I think if you see knight takes e3, then you just kind of have to go for it, because after knight takes d5, bishop takes c4, there's not really much to go. There's a chance that he might have missed f4 later on, because it's kind of dangerous. White has no way to protect against the g2 mate threat in the position. So he might have predicted that white would have had to go for something like this, just sacrifice the queen, which I guess if this happens, then it's good for black.
Yeah.
See, I think knight takes e3 was definitely kind of the only way to save it at this point. So just going to the rest of the game. So now white is just trying to trade all his pieces. If you're up a bishop, sometimes you just want to trade all the pieces, get into a situation where black has no counterplay anymore. And yeah, here, now there's just a lot of play. And I think it's kind of just black can't really do much here. The a6 pawn is going to be lost, and yeah, it seems relatively over.
Yeah, we could even potentially see a resignation soon from Daniel, but I don't see Ethan blowing this one.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, I guess we have a game update because Dane has officially won this game.
Wow.
So I guess we didn't see any more moves from Norman. We just saw a resignation, and he realized that after rook b1, there's really just no way.
Because
So I think that's just
if after rook b1 and then rook b2, you just throw in a check with the knight.
like after taking.
Can you check first, or is that bad? Like knight d5 check.
Oh, I mean that's not check in this position, right?
Oh, yeah, it's not. Okay, and that's
Yeah.
a blind spot. Then why did? Yeah, because I guess just you can't catch the pawn. You trade rooks, and the knight and king are too far away. Wow.
Yeah, so it's kind of just impressive geometry with this bishop stopping all of the possible entries for the knight. And I think maybe he just missed how strong pushing this pawn is after knight f4, because he definitely had other options, and this knight on d5 at the moment restricts any play from white.
He was probably still trying to win when he should have been trying to save the game.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's really difficult when you go from a winning position to something where it's a draw, or even you have some issues. Sometimes in your mind, you still think, oh, I should have won this game. Like, I need to go try, do anything I can, but then you leave some opportunities for your opponent. And I mean, in this case, it worked perfectly for Dane. He just played b6 and then took the full point. So yeah, that's a really impressive turnaround for Dane for sure.
Now that's back-to-back weeks we've had the player of the week winning. Last week Eddie was our player of the week, and he was able to get the victory. And now Dane gets the victory this week. I actually might go back even further. I'm not sure who. I think Miles was our player of the week in last Thursday of March, but I'm not remembering who won that game. But we'll see if the trend continues next week.
Yeah, for sure. So moving on to some of the later boards, we have Thomas Babcock versus Jason Wagner. These players also kind of play at the castle a solid amount. Jason is a classical Sicilian kind of specialist, and in this case, he got the Sicilian again, which I guess is right up his alley. So we saw instead of a Najdorf, now we have Knight C6, which kind of goes into the Rouser Sicilian, slightly different. And Thomas here played the main move, which is Bishop G5, just putting the most pressure. And yeah, he just played this kind of simply, Queen D2, Castle. This is just normal moves from both sides. There's a lot of games in this position. Bishop E2 is relatively uncommon. I think usually people go for something like F3 or F4 in this position, just because they don't know where you don't know where you want to put this bishop yet. A lot of times it can go to C4 and back to B3, or it can just stay on E2. So it's kind of an interesting choice to commit to Bishop E2, just right off the bat.
Yeah.
So just kind of normal moves, both sides. It's important that you go Bishop H4, just because you don't want to trade off this bishop.
Yeah, that gives Black a lot of play on that diagonal.
And in this position, it's actually kind of dangerous. There's always, you have to imagine this knight takes E4 idea. At the moment, it doesn't work. But if the white king ever moves to B1, for example, just make a random move, for example, king B1, now you actually have this move. And the problem is that this is with check. So these positions with the bishop on H4 and kind of this whole setup, you always have to be concerned about knight takes E4. I've actually seen several games where this tactic is employed and white just loses very quickly.
Yeah, no, it's a definitely interesting point because I don't think Thomas will blunder that, but it's a good point because so many times when in chess when you castle queen side, you always want to move your king one square over, move it to king B1 for white or king B8 for black. So something to watch out for, but he'll probably see it.
Yeah. And I mean, black continued with B5, which is really normal in these types of Sicilians. Black is always just trying to get as much play on the queen side as possible and very quickly. And we saw bishop F3, which makes a lot of sense, just putting his bishop on the now vulnerable diagonal and also protecting this E4 pawn. Because in this position, black is threatening B4 and then E4 will be hanging. So bishop F3 back to knight E2 is just very natural moves. And now black took on D4, which I guess he might have been scared about E5, which now this knight on C6 is kind of vulnerable. But I mean, in a position like this, white has a lot of activity. And I mean, for me, I think I just prefer white here because he has a lot more space. And I think the play for white is kind of more straightforward for sure.
And in the future, can he play a move like G4 and try to attack on the king side? Is that a possibility?
Yeah, I think if black ever castles, for example, then going for something like G4, G5, or Rook G1 is always a possibility. So in this case, we actually saw white playing E5, which is a really good move by Thomas, I think. Just putting pressure. And if you're able to play E5 as white in a Sicilian like this, with no real issues, it's always a good move. Just putting pressure, kind of, especially with the king stuck here. If you ever get in a position where, like, for example, you take, the king is actually really dangerous now, especially when you have the queen and rook doubled on the D file. So to kind of keep that file closed, Jason decided to play knight D5. Now we got bishop takes E7, queen takes E7, and now, so Thomas played bishop to G5, which is a good move for sure. There's also this possibility, which I think of, is knight f5, which is actually a really common theme in these positions. Uh, Sacrifices with knight on d5 or knight on f5 is always kind of common to open up this e-file. But in this case, it's not much of a sacrifice because now you have something like this.
Wow. Yeah.
And I think taking on d6 first might actually be a little better just because now you're threatening all sorts of tactics like bishop takes f7. So definitely there's like two ways to play here in this position with knight f5 or just bishop takes d5. And he chose the positional approach, which I think is also great. And now, I mean, it's definitely clear that white is just much better here.
Yeah. I definitely did like that f5 move you were mentioning. That does look a bit better than this position, but either way, yeah, nice position for Thomas.
Yeah, I mean, I think in either case, white is has a good advantage and is doing well. So continuing with this game, I'm not sure if h3 was very necessary because it kind of just wasted a move and allowed black to bring his rook over. Maybe rook e5 to begin with was just a slightly better option, but I don't think it affects the evaluation too much. Now we can see black is just really cramped here. This bishop has not many squares. White is even, I think, at this point threatening something like g4, g5, and this rook on f6 is trapped. So I think this is just really good positional play from Thomas.
Yeah, very interesting game in the sense that obviously it's equal material, but Thomas was able to get Jason's king in a vulnerable position where he was never able to castle. And even though now his king looks like it's castled, it's on the g8 square. Thomas now has his pieces all in proper position. Great rooks on the open e file, knight and queen, great positioning. So even though he doesn't have that maybe advantage in his king not being as vulnerable anymore, he definitely has better piece activity.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even though there's equal material, you always got to watch out for the piece activity. I mean, it's part of just any positional evaluation. White's pieces are much better placed, and he has a lot more space. So I guess he played queen f3 here. I think maybe just going for g4 directly was the nicer approach. Just you're threatening g5 at this point, just a one move threat. But I'm playing it slowly is also solid. And now he decided to go for material, which is kind of fair. Now he's just up a pawn. And I guess Jason, as a Sicilian player, you know, he's always trying to spice things up, make things really complicated. So in order to just not kind of succumb to being down a pawn, he goes for some activity. And now Thomas just kind of shuts it down with a3, making sure that no business with pawn takes on a2 is happening. And the other idea is that you think that you could maybe trade queens here, but now actually the knight is being threatened along with pawn takes b takes a2. So you can't actually trade the queens immediately, which is something that white would like to do, given that he's just up a pawn.
And that was probably exactly what Thomas was hoping for.
Yeah. So he played a3. I think just a solid move, not letting anything happen. And now he took. The one thing I do wonder about this position is now, so black is down a pawn, but he's down a pawn on this queen side. And especially where it's a bishop versus knight, this pawn really can't break through, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if this bishop ever somehow lands on b3, it's just really hard to get rid of.
Yeah.
So he's down a pawn, but it's really hard to make use of that extra pawn for white, I think.
Yeah, it kind of makes me think when he opted to go for that queen trade and go up the pawn on d5. I kind of just preferred to keep pushing on the king side, like you mentioned, play G4, play G5.
Mhm.
The H file could open up. At very least, you're threatening to trap the rook, like you said. So maybe he was a bit too hasty to go for the material.
Yeah, I think for sure. I mean, material is always nice to go for. You can you can always say you're up a pawn. It's really easy to tell. But sometimes piece activity and just general uh, getting more space in the position might actually be a little more useful. Like I really think G4 was a good option here. Just kind of trade, and now you're just rolling these pawns, and it's really difficult for black to play. But now when you get into a position like this, after like knight takes c2, white doesn't really have that much activity here. Like I think both sides have the same amount of activity, and the white king is actually a little less safe than the black one.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, we see this knight on c2 is now pinned, and it's kind of uh, kind of a little dangerous. One thing he could have tried was taking, but after something like this, I think this is back to equality, and white is not in the driver's seat anymore.
Hmm.
So definitely a good decision to keep the tension. So now black plays g6, trying to get this bishop to f5, being able to take this material. And now we get g4. And now with the trade, it's kind of similar to what I was talking about in Dane's game. There's not many pawns on the board anymore, which makes it a lot more likely to end up in a draw.
Hmm.
So that's, I mean, something to watch out for Thomas as he's up a pawn. But if the pawn numbers keep going down, it could end up being in danger of getting a draw.
Yeah, this would be very interesting if we had multiple games in the same round where one player was significantly winning. Thomas, not like you said, not so much in material, but just in the sense that the position was so dominating with better pieces, all of the kingside play he had. Um, but it would definitely be interesting if both. Um, Technically, he wasn't able to save the game, but it was it was the turnaround in that game, and this game could be probably not a win for Jason, but Jason might be able to hold this.
Yeah. I mean, after a move, he played like f6. This is still not super clear how black will be able to generate enough activity. But after something like this, I mean, he's already threatening to play bishop b3 here. And I don't really see how white can untangle. If ever something like king b1, bishop b3, and this knight is just forever stuck. Something like knight d4, then you run into checkmate. And you can never roll the rook back to g1 to try to defend against mate, because now there's always rook takes c2, and you just, or even bishop takes c2, and you win the c2 knight. So after something like this, I actually find it really difficult to get any way that white can win this.
Yeah, and if we look at the clocks, Thomas is under 7 minutes, while Jason still has over half hour on his clock. So, looking very promising for Jason to be able to save this game.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it feels like white kind of has to unpin this knight right here. So even after this, I actually think neither side can make any progress at this point.
Hmm.
White will probably just keep shuffling the rook around. Not really too much to do. There's a possibility of playing rook h8, trading a pair of rooks, and then being able to move the knight out. But it's really difficult.
Yeah, there's a dumb checkmate if black isn't careful. If rook h2 and then I don't know, black plays something like rook c5, you could come in with
Mhm.
rook h8, and if black plays the worst move and he plays king f7, you'll get
Yeah,
checkmated thanks to that powerful pawn. But something like that will never happen. Just a kind of a funny little checkmate to show.
yeah. But I mean, the threat of rook h8 is kind of annoying, especially because let's say a pair of rooks is traded. now knight d4 is possible. And although this still remains a challenge for white to win this game, I guess it's not deadlocked anymore, and he still has some hope. So Thomas played rook h2 in this position, kind of aiming for the same goal. And as a game update, so Ethan did end up winning his game against Daniel. So just to show kind of the finishing touches. We had this occur. And now this is just leading to a checkmate. So if black tries to defend, we lead to rook here. And obviously rook g6 is just, he's down a rook.
Yeah, game over.
So just well played from Ethan. He kind of took advantage of these tactics, and missing knight takes e3 here as black. And after knight takes d5, he won the piece. Making sure to play f4 was kind of saving the game in a sense, but also winning the game for him. So after that, he just played really well, taking advantage of his extra piece and eventually sealing the victory.
Yeah.
So moving on, we had Jonah Butler versus Robert Donahue. So Robert Donahue is kind of known for he likes to sack a piece. People say that he sacks a piece in almost all the games he plays. So definitely a really chaotic player for sure.
Yeah.
And we got another Sicilian. We've seen a few Sicilians here, but in this case, Robert opted for a different setup with knight c3. Usually we just saw direct knight f3 and d4, but it ended up being a similar position. So if we had knight f6 here, then we would have reached the same position as in Thomas versus Jason that we just saw. But instead he played e5. And in this case, it allows a little bit of kind of maneuvering from white, playing knight f5. And now after something like knight e3, white is he has the d5 square, and in positions like Sicilians where there's the pawn on d6, e5, and e4, having control of that square is always really important.
Yeah, that's after e5. What do you usually play in these positions? Or maybe that goes back to my question earlier. Maybe you don't get into these positions too often just because of your opening preferences. But I usually I don't think I've ever played knight f5 in a classical game, let alone probably even an online game. I usually play knight b3 or sometimes knight f3. So definitely just an interesting decision in my opinion.
Yeah, I haven't really gotten to these types of positions, especially with like an early e5. Actually, knight f5 is kind of an interesting move, just making sure that you get control of this d5 square. The only possible drawback would be if taking like here, now this f5 pawn is a little weak. But having the bishop pair plus these really weak light squares could be a pretty good asset for white later on. So I guess it's not the type of position that you'd go into if you have no clue about it beforehand. I guess you'd want to make sure knight f5 works well before playing it.
Yeah.
And seeing that he played it relatively quickly, you know, he only lost 3 seconds. I think it's safe to assume Robert probably knows these positions. So now he played a4, which is kind of the move that you liked earlier, where he's stopping b5. So this is kind of like a different, more positional setup from white, where he's just playing on kind of like the weaknesses, just slowly stopping black from getting a lot of counterplay, and just trying to slowly advance. So we continued some natural setup moves. This is a really common setup for white, where he has a knight on d5, and bishop on d3. And Robert's kind of taking advantage of the fact that there's a hole on b6 plus this hole on d5 caused by pawn to e5. So I think it's really interesting how Jonah is developing pieces here. He has this pawn on g6, so it could have been possible to think about like something like bishop g7, but he kept his bishop on e7, which could run into some later issues. Like if black ever plays knight f6, bishop h6 is possible. So now in a position like this, so how would you kind of play this out, Michael? Considering, you said you like to play a4.
Yeah, usually it's a bit different because black usually like I said, I don't go for the knight f5 setup. So I'm a bit unfamiliar with black having that pawn on g6, but I kind of like just pretty standard development here, probably bishop e2. I don't know if bishop d3 is as good just because then knight b4, I guess the knight before hangs a knight, but just kind of being patient, bishop e2, castles, queen d2. Maybe you can try f4 pawn push in the future. Might not be great, but I usually like to push that pawn forward. But at the same time, I kind of like for black, since you already have g6 and f5 is also a very natural pawn push. So I could very well see some action on the f file in the future.
Yeah, definitely. In this position, I like a5, just kind of clamping down on the structure. Black can't really take on a5 just because of like these tactics with bishop b6. So I think a5 would be my preference in this position, just to make sure that you have this b6 square for the rest of the game. You could run into some issues where the pawn on a5 becomes weak, but for now, in the foreseeable future, it shouldn't be too much of a worry.
Yeah, very nice.
So Robert, instead of a5 or bishop e2, he opted for b4, just trying to go for a really quick attack. It's clear that he's trying to be as aggressive as possible here. But Jonah correctly identified that this is actually a mistake with knight takes b4. And now this tactic ends up winning a pawn.
Mhm.
So it's an in-between move. Robert just tried to attack the queen, and now he kind of traded knights in a way. But as you can see here, black successfully won a pawn, plus now the structure isn't really that great. And there's not too much to worry for black.
I wonder this. I'm sure this is bad, but just a crazy idea here. If you're white and you kind of want to panic, and I'm not looking ahead, but knowing that also Robert's kind of a aggressive player, and likes to kind of be daring and switch it up. I wonder if he could just play knight takes a6 and kind of have some hope there. Hoping to get that past, create a past a pawn, and if takes a6, bishop takes a6, you have ideas of bishop b5 pinning the queen. It's probably no good, but something he could at least consider.
Yeah, I think you kind of read his mind, considering the very next move.
Oh, okay,
where
he did
play knight takes a6, which I guess really suits his style, considering he likes to sacrifice pieces and get into crazy positions.
That's funny.
I don't really think it's like objectively sound, and it's kind of the best move. It's probably better to just slowly develop pieces, maybe jump back to d5. But definitely in a style, playing something like knight takes a6, going for this type of position. Here, just trying to push this a pawn. That's kind of good sight into the future for what he's about to play. So Jonah played king f8, just trying to get out of the pin. And after something like this, Robert has kind of one main plan, just try to push the a pawn, but kind of runs into issues. Now he's losing all his pawns, and he's just down a knight plus a pawn here. And now he really has to hope that pushing this a pawn will eventually work.
Mm-hmm.
But in this position, it's kind of hard to see because there's not too much. It's kind of relatively easy to stop this pawn from pushing. So eventually he tried to consolidate, trade queens. But in a position like this, uh, I mean, for me, I think just taking this bishop is just a good idea. Uh, now it's really unrealistic to see this pawn going all the way, especially with this dark squared bishop so strong.
Yeah.
So I would have preferred just trading that piece off, especially with this bishop being a relatively strong piece. But I mean, just playing it slowly, there's not much to do anyway. And after something like this, the pawn was lost, and I mean, there's not too much left in the game.
Mm.
I mean, he was just down a piece. Yeah, and eventually we reached checkmate.
Interesting game. So Robert, he blundered that pawn, and then a little bit
Mhm.
predictably, he went for the, I don't know if you want to call it desperation, but you probably could. He went for the desperation sacrifice that unfortunately just didn't work out.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of easy to panic once you realize you've made a mistake. Like, especially after rook takes c3, white Robert just kind of has to accept that he lost a pawn, and it's not really the best scenario. But going for a sacrifice like this might be just too hasty, considering it's not the end of the world. I mean, white is still up a little bit of kind of development.
Hmm.
So, although it's a pawn, I mean, he can still come back from it. But after a sacrifice, it's just really difficult.
Yeah, and with the games we've seen tonight, comeback's always possible. So
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Jonah just played a really good game, just playing all natural moves and making sure that he doesn't try anything too fancy, just playing calmly, kind of stopping the A pawn from pushing, and eventually he was able to seal a victory.
hmm.
So going on to the next game, we had John Baker as black, and we had Thomas Hayden playing the white pieces.
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with either of these players. I've never played Thomas Hayden. I've played John Baker a couple times. He's a good, I think, 1750, 800-ish level player, if my memory
Mhm.
serves me correctly. So should be a good matchup.
Yeah, John has been playing in the castle for kind of a long time. As I remember him playing even when I was much younger.
Mm,
And Thomas is kind of like he plays the Catalan a lot. In this game, he was not able to secure his special opening, but he's kind of a Catalan specialist and likes to play it a lot.
mm,
So this game we saw Queen's Gambit accepted, and just kind of a slow game, pretty common. Bishop g4 isn't the most popular move here. Usually they opt for like e6 and then eventually something like c5. But bishop d4 is also certainly a fine move, just to get the bishop out before playing e6. So it's kind of an interesting opening. It's not too explored. Like you don't really see an opening like this that commonly, but it's always interesting to see.
yeah, maybe that's why he played it. Maybe he wanted something slightly offbeat.
For sure. So there's some natural development moves. It's kind of interesting to see knight c6, considering in these positions a lot of times black wants to play for c5. So something like knight d7 or even a6 with the idea of b5 and then c5 is probably a little more common. So knight c6 was kind of an interesting development choice for sure.
Hmm.
Just some natural moves. G4 is kind of bold. I mean, obviously, I don't think a sacrifice here works, but when someone plays g4 in this position, you always have to at least look at knight takes g4, see if it's an option.
For sure.
But it's a little dangerous considering black hasn't castled yet. So, I mean, John could always think about playing something like queen d7, and then castling queenside, and now this g4 pawn just becomes really weak. And you can take advantage of it with like h5.
Yeah, that looks quite good.
So here we got knight e5, just trying to simplify things, and this was kind of an interesting choice. So all the pieces were traded, and eventually we reached this position where white has the bishop pair and a little extra space, but his pawns aren't supported very well, and they could become weak eventually. So we ended up with this, and after rook d8, Thomas played f3, kicked the knight out. And in a position like this, I think, for example, a move to play could have been like rook d4. You want to double the rooks up. You want to get as much activity. Just put all your pieces on the best possible squares. He played e4, which I think is also kind of a great move. This bishop, I don't really see any life for it anymore.
No.
It's kind of just locked behind this wall of pawns, and if you try something like h5, you still never reach any point. Something making random moves. The bishop is still eternally stuck. So now knight d7 was played, and there's actually no way to defend this pawn anymore on e5.
Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting to see. So maybe rook d4 was probably a better option than e4, just so eventually you can always play f4 to guard that pawn. But Thomas found a great way to defend, I think. Where he brought his bishop back to e2 first, prophylaxis, and after knight takes e5, he played f4. And
tactical possibilities.
For sure. And if the knight moves away like c6, there's always just f5, and the piece is gone. So in order to combat that, John he took on g4, trying to get as many pawns as possible. But actually, I guess this is equal material in a way. There's a big imbalance where black has 3 pawns, whereas white has the extra dark squared bishop. It's really always interesting to see how these games turn out.
Yeah, agreed. I always like seeing these imbalanced positions where material's equal, but you're never quite as sure what the result might be, just because you have so many more variables.
Yeah, I mean, usually the bishop is a little stronger than the 3 pawns, especially when there's a lot of pawns and pieces left. You can always run into the scenario where the pawns just become a little too scary, and it's difficult to defend them. So we continued with c4, and then we had castling. And I guess you can see in this case, the bishops just become really strong and start attacking all of the pieces. And now you can see white just has a lot of activity. And I think Thomas really executed this really well. He was able to use his extra piece, kind of generate a lot of activity, and now his rook has infiltrated. After something like this, I guess he was forced to bring it back. Maybe another option that he could have thought of was like rook d1, kind of try to keep as much activity as possible. But I guess the rook had been traded, and it's difficult to say how white can push forward. So he just brought the pieces back as natural, and now a pair of rooks were traded. And okay, this is actually a really interesting situation. So John decided not to trade another pair of rooks.
Yeah, very odd, because you're giving up the d file. He must have been scared going into that endgame, but kind of seems like one of those situations where, okay, maybe you're scared you might be losing, but if you don't trade, you might be losing even more. The valuation might go down even further. Just
Mhm.
because if you don't trade, now White just has the only open file, and his position will probably only get a bit better.
Yeah. I think probably what John was scared of is more of the concrete lines. So, for example, if you trade rooks, it's actually kind of difficult to stop these pawns from hanging. So now white is threatening bishop b8, and so like just playing move like f6, bishop b8. Now you actually lost the c5 pawn.
Hmm.
But I mean, it's still interesting. There's very few pawns left. You can try something like b5 and if exchanging. White only has 3 pawns left. He should be winning, but it's always a struggle when there's very few pawns left, and black always has some tricks up his sleeve.
Hmm.
So instead, he just gave away the file, but still trying his best to keep the pawns defended. So after king f2, he played b5, just trying to open things up, trade as many pawns as possible. It might have been a little better, try to just play a6 first, so that eventually after playing b5, he's able to exchange it with the a pawn, and that's a little better than in this scenario where after something like take, the pawns are disconnected. So instead of that, Thomas played bishop e2, which kind of allows more activity from black here now, where there's b4, and he's threatening something like a5, a4. But then we got rook g1, targeting this g7 bishop, g7 pawn with the bishop on e5. And now he came back. Now that he provoked these weaknesses, f6 is no longer possible. So I
Yeah,
think that's a really good play by Thomas, introducing these dark squared holes, which now can never be defended by black.
yeah, very nice.
And now he traded one of the pairs of bishops, which or attempted to trade, which I think is always better for white. Just reduce the amount of pieces, reduce the amount of counterplay.
And I think a good point to look at is after king f8, bishop
Mm-hmm.
d6 looks appealing, but I think it actually doesn't work out for white due to tactics. Because after
Yeah.
the king moves, bishop takes c5. I believe black has bishop a4. Now you're hitting
Mm-hmm.
both the bishop and the rook, so good job by Thomas avoiding that.
Yeah, for sure. Uh, the bishop and rook are both hanging. I mean, there's always the possibility of going just up 2 bishops for rook, but you would never want to overcomplicate things, especially when you're just up a clean piece. So good work by Thomas, just playing slowly, playing naturally. Rook a6 was kind of an interesting choice here, but I guess he calculated it pretty well. I mean, if the bishop moves away, then there's just pawn takes here, and then after b2,
Hmm.
the bishop is just defending it anyway. And yeah, in this position, I mean, the a4 bishop was lost, and there's nothing really to play for anymore.
Nice tactic to finish out the game for Thomas.
Yeah, so I think just really well played game by Thomas, making sure that once he won this piece, he just slowly gained a lot of activity, got the open file, was able to just provoke some weaknesses like playing rook g1 and then back to d1. Just kind of requires a little higher sense, like being able to just create a weakness and then go back to the original square you came from. That's really imaginative play by Thomas.
Yeah,
So here now we had our final game between Jaren and Mitch. Mitch is kind of a beginner, but he's studying a lot and he's definitely improving a lot. So It's kind of exciting to see his games. And here, now we had a Slav. We kind of saw a bit too many QGDs, so now we had to deviate the opening a bit. And then kind of return to a semi-Slav structure with his bishop on f5 instead of being stuck on c8.
Just to get your opinion, what do you think of the queen b3 lines a bit earlier on? As soon as black plays bishop f5, I personally like going for the queen b3 line. I know it's just still opening. It's still just opening theory. Black usually plays like queen b6. But I always like this. I don't know, just black leaving that b7 pawn a bit vulnerable off the get-go. It's always just seems like a good idea to bring that queen out.
Yeah, I think actually in this case, queen b3 is just a really good move because after the bishop went to f5, you're not threatening two pawns. So maybe actually it was a little better for him to play knight f6 first.
Mm-hmm.
Which kind of a reason, if you look at the Masters database on Lichess, knight f6 has about 22,000 games. Bishop f5 has 4. So you can see, I think it runs into queen b3 a lot, and I mean, white's just winning a pawn here.
Yeah.
And I actually remember when I was kind of starting out playing chess, I played this opening as black with bishop f5, and after queen b3, I realized I can never play this again. So it's kind of...
And I think what sometimes happens to black players in this is I've had games, not so much OTB, but online games where you can kind of trick your opponent. They can try and this position is a bad example because they, like you said, they just can't hang on to both pawns. But just to say if they did have their knight on f6, and maybe we had our knight on f3, if they try and move like queen c7 to hold on to the b7 pawn, white often has ideas in these positions of bishop f4, a deflection tactic, trying to deflect the queen away. And if they take on f4, then our queen comes in and there's no way to save the rook. Granted, they could just bring the queen back to c8, but then you kind of just win a free tempo. So in certain positions like these in the Slav, when black brings out their light squared bishop too early, you also you often can take advantage of that.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty common theme. I also have noticed that theme. It happens in the London, kind of with reversed colors, where black plays queen b6, and then the same idea with queen c2, and then bishop f5. So yeah, bringing out the bishop from c8 or c1 too early always leads into some of these issues where the d pawn plus the b pawn are suddenly not defended.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely queen b3, I think, was kind of a missed opportunity here, but playing naturally with something like knight f3 is kind of hard to blame. So we continue with kind of common moves. Bishop d3. And this kind of reminds me of like a reversed London kind of structure with his pawns on c6, e6, d5, and the bishop on f5, where eventually white is playing bishop d3. It's kind of a London, well, with an extra tempo for white.
Yeah, an interesting, almost transposition type of position. Yeah.
So in these positions, a lot of times, I think black runs into a few issues. I like playing e4 here. I mean, you get into this kind of structure, something like this, and this almost resembles a Scandinavian. You know, a lot of cases you kind of get into the structure. And I mean, it's not really that bad for black, but I always like these positions as white just because there's more space and you have a lot more ideas with like maybe eventually a3, b4.
Yeah, I like it too, and it seems that if black ever tries to like kind of provoke your center, you could potentially get a pass pawn. If he ever goes for c5 in certain positions, maybe if you have it supported well enough, you could maybe thrust the pawn forward to d5. Might be difficult to do, but if you could get that in, you would probably just have a better shot at winning the game.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, c5, d5. Oops, sorry. c5, d5 doesn't work at the moment, but it's always you always need to watch out for playing d5 because I mean just getting like a passer. Obviously in this position it might not work, but this kind of structure is always really dangerous for black because the pawn on d5 just gets too strong.
Yeah, exactly.
Rook fe1 is also kind of a normal move. But now after d takes c4, now the problem, I mean, he can still play e4 here, which I think is probably preferable here. Now we get into these types of positions that I think you were talking about, c5, d5. But I guess in this case, d5, you always have something like knight b6.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, these positions are always kind of interesting to see how they turn out because white has a lot of space, but black is always able to push for c5, and eventually when things open up, black is doing fine. So in this position, knight h5 was played to grab the bishop pair. It's not bishop pair, but just to remove this bishop. But after something like this, now the knight on h5 is actually stuck, which is kind of an odd thing to see considering a knight on h5 and this pawn on e5.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a rare sight. So after g4, which kind of looks a little bold and daring, it actually just wins a clean piece.
Yeah, it's a very interesting concept, like you mentioned. The knight, the old added knights on the side get fried, knights on the rim are dim. Those sayings can kind of get a little obnoxious at times, especially if you've heard them a lot. But I mean, they're true, especially when you have a strong pawn on e5. Always something you had to watch out for. So it's not much he could do there. His queen was attacked, and it's kind of a double threat.
Yeah, I mean, maybe he might have just missed how strong, or just missed the g4 move because it's kind of an odd move. You don't usually want to play g4 in a position where your king is castled on the king side. But maybe he just missed that the bishop on e5 can't really be taken due to all these tactics.
Yeah, he just apparently had to just bring the knight back. It's kind of my old coach used to say that when you don't know what to do, and I'm not saying this guy didn't know what to do, but when you don't know what to do, look for your worst piece and look to improve it. And right now, that knight on h5 is definitely your worst piece. So just bring it back would have been a much better option for Jaron.
Yeah, definitely. One possibility that maybe you kind of want to play c5, and maybe at the moment you can actually go for it because for something like this, now black definitely has a little more activity. Jaron might have been a little worried about this rook being really strong, but with this knight on f6 defending the knight on d7, something like here, it's kind of all as well for black. And in positions like this, at least when I'm black, playing c5 is always just a really big relief. It's something that if you don't get to play, then you run into a lot of issues, but it's something that you always want to go for.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So unfortunately for Jaron, he lost the piece with g4 and had to bring back to knight f6. From here on out, it's kind of playing simple. I guess this was kind of inviting a little bit of trouble now with queen c2, and these knights are a little weak. So Jaron kind of tried to take advantage of this with f5, but after something like this, it's not really that bad.
Yeah.
And white is always threatening queen c4, and this is the very well-known mating technique. Something like here. Now you got knight f7.
Yes. Smothered mate if he doesn't take.
So everything is perfectly set up well for white here. Queen g6 was a strong move. Just making sure But now it's kind of interesting that Jaren didn't play h6. I think it's definitely worth a try here.
Yeah, this is definitely the most natural move. But if h6, white probably can play h5. Maybe it's not the best
Mhm.
move, but it looks like it at least saves the piece, and then you're still just winning the game cleanly.
Yeah, it actually might be. Uh, I think h6 was definitely a missed opportunity here. Something like h5, but now if queen takes h5, it's knight on f3 is actually hanging.
Oh, true. Yeah, so maybe h6 looks even stronger now.
hmm I was thinking originally maybe the only way that he could try to defend is something like this. Queen e6. It's a lot of tactics. Rook f6 obviously doesn't work. It's queen takes c8. But after bishop f6, I mean, it's kind of unclear how to move forward.
Do you have to go like 95 maybe? Maybe saves the day?
Yeah, I think 95 actually. Yeah, it's should be winning here.
But a bit a
Something.
bit a bit convoluted, so
Yeah, you definitely
definitely
don't want
h6.
to. You definitely don't want to try to enter this as white because it's queen h5, something like this. Now you can even try sacrificing, getting your queen entered. But I mean, white is definitely winning here, but uh, when you're down a piece and you kind of don't have much to do, even if you're not playing the objectively best moves, sometimes you would just want to complicate things, uh, make things a little more unclear.
Exactly, yeah.
So, uh, queen takes f5 is actually really bold considering this tactic, but I guess it all turned out fine.
That's a bit of an odd move,
Yeah, I was a little surprised by that.
but maybe yeah, I mean, if we count the material, I guess he's still up a pawn, but it seems like just bringing the knight back to e4. Maybe he was worried about
Mhm.
like queen takes h4, but at least you're not losing a piece.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting decision here. Knight e4 just makes a lot of sense. Something like here, you can always just bring the queen back to g2. Or, I mean, okay, not here. Now there's queen takes g3, but uh, I mean, this seems just keeping the piece makes a lot more sense to me.
Yeah, for sure.
But I guess he just wanted to trade into a rook endgame where he's just up a pawn. Actually, he's not even up a pawn here. It's equal material.
Yeah, it's equal to so maybe I don't know what happened there, but yeah.
Yeah, I guess maybe he got a little too concerned about the queen on h5.
hmm Yeah.
I think actually instead of 94, maybe a better move here is like 96.
Yeah, much better. More forcing.
And now this not too much. So yeah, sacking the piece is really an interesting decision. I would definitely prefer white here because the rook is more active and the pawns on the queen side could become a little weak. But I don't think objectively it should be equal.
hmm
So played c4. I guess he's trying to push the pawns here. Um, and now he's just playing slowly. f3 is interesting. There's also king f3 trying to just king f4 pushing the pawn,
hmm
but f3 isn't bad. And yeah, I mean he played that general plan later, and now black went back to e7. Uh, I might think rook h5 was a little more enticing just because you're attacking the pawn, forcing something like here. Now you can go to like c5.
hmm
And this is always dangerous because black is threatening this b4 and then going to push.
Yeah, but definitely can't be too passive here because white's getting some play with that advanced e pawn, the king.
Mhm.
So he needs to be probably a bit more active than what he did end up doing, which just moving the rook back. So yeah, keeping the rook on the fist seems like better idea.
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, he played rook e7, and now I played rook c6. I think maybe I would have preferred playing e5 here, just getting as much space as quickly as possible. But he might have been worried about like rook c7 and then b4,
Mhm.
which is pretty fair. So rook f7 was definitely not too necessary, I think, because the king is never going to e5 anyway. You want to push these pawns anyway.
Yeah.
And I guess the pawns kept rolling, and we actually now black blunders the tactic here. Um, King f6, you have e5 check.
Hmm.
So it's kind of an unfortunate oversight from Jaren, especially coming back from a piece down. Now it's an equalish endgame. White has a lot of chances, but dropping a rook like this cannot be a nice way to go out.
Yeah, very, very topsy-turvy game, but Mitch
Mhm.
ultimately kind of gets spared after kind of blundering it back to a draw. He's able to, I mean, he played the end game pretty well to push those e-pawns forward, or push the e-pawn forward, and then bring his
Mhm.
king, kind of just having a better activity than black, and kind of forcing black into making that blunder. But yeah, if Jaren would have just moved his king back, he definitely would have had more
Mhm.
chances.
Yeah, something like king e8. I mean, I definitely prefer white here, but I mean, anything can happen. It's not super clear.
Yeah.
But yeah, after this, there's not much else to do. And here, he resigned.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely, as you said, very topsy turvy. A lot of things happened here. White quickly kind of won a piece, which it's always you need to watch out. Make sure all your pieces have enough squares to go to. Doesn't get trapped on the side of the board. But Jared played actively. He fought back, and eventually, I think Mitch made the mistake sacking that knight back. And yeah, just an unfortunate blunder with the rook at the end, but it's a really fun game to watch for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's all of the 8 games. I guess we're still waiting for the result in this game, with Jason and Thomas, but really interesting games from all around. Everyone, there was a lot of really good positional play that I saw here, and kind of typically happened a lot of games where one side made a mistake and the other player never really let it go.
Exactly.
So it's a fun experience watching these games and commentating. Uh,
Yeah, definitely a lot of exciting games. I definitely echo what you said about seeing kind of the story of tonight was one side would get a clear advantage. Maybe that was even a piece advantage. They would just go up an entire piece, and then usually they would convert, but sometimes there was a massive comeback that we saw. So definitely a very lot of interesting games tonight.
mhm. So this final game, it looks like it's ending in a draw with Thomas and Jason, which is kind of going back to the original. Very well played by Jason coming back from the pawn deficit. And I mean, in a position like this, it just seems like White has so much, just a giant advantage. But him uh, getting back to a position where actually he's playing for something and he's not just getting shut out was definitely a great play. I
Yeah,
think it's
very.
interesting that. Oh, sorry.
No, you go ahead.
I think it's very interesting that he didn't go for just like a repetition here. Like he could have gone back to e5 maybe, but
Yeah, very
uh,
very interesting game. Good hold from Jason because he was, like you said, he was in dire straits there, but he was able to kind of hang on and um, I mean, just I feel like maybe the key point of this game was don't be too materialistic because Thomas decided to take the pawn on d5 with his queen, and that was probably the turning point of the game. You could argue, um, kind of like we were talking about earlier. If you just kind of keep advancing those pawns on the king side, you probably end up winning this one.
Yeah, for sure. I think something like G4, as I mentioned earlier, was definitely just preferable in my eyes. Just don't focus on just winning a pawn because a pawn isn't really can't really end the game a lot 100% of the time. Just getting as much play and activity as possible is definitely just the best strategy here. Because now, I mean, ended up White is still. I mean, Thomas is still up a pawn here, but he doesn't really have too much with it. And eventually, it just kind of traded pieces off, and now it's back to equal material.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this I think should end in a draw fairly quickly. Okay, so I had a good time commentating. Michael, it was really fun to watch all these games.
Yeah, it's a great
And,
time. A lot of
thank you.
good, fun, exciting chess. And we'll see you all next week, guys. Bye bye. Have a great night.
Yep.